Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're taking a wild ride through a fascinating set of source materials. We're going to start in the very physical, grounded world of healthcare policy, and then we're heading straight into the cutting edge, almost science fictional legal frontier of neurorights.
So let's just dive right in with a massive foundational question. When it comes to your health, your physical body, and honestly, even the thoughts bouncing around inside your head, who is actually in the driver's seat? I mean, we'd all like to think it's us, right? We assume we have total control. Well, when push comes to shove, is it really you, your doctor, or the government making that final call?
To make sense of all this tension, we're going to follow a pretty clear path today. We'll hit the autonomy battleground, barriers to physical choice, harm reduction and paternalism, the cognitive liberty frontier, regulating the mind, and finally, who owns your mind. All right, kicking things off with part one, the autonomy battleground, paternalism versus individual choice. To really grasp where we are right now, we kind of have to look at where we used to be. Just a century ago, medical paternalism was the absolute gold standard. Doctors essentially called all the shots. Sometimes they'd even hide a severe diagnosis from a patient just to spare them the emotional distress. Today, thankfully, informed consent flips that script. It empowers you to make decisions about your own well-being. Think about all the paperwork you have to sign before even a minor surgery. That is informed consent in action, and it protects your right to refuse treatment, even if it puts you at personal risk. But here is where things get incredibly ironic. The sources highlight this massive disconnect. Inside the clinic, your doctor absolutely has to respect your autonomy, but the second you step outside, that principle frequently vanishes. Government bureaucracy actively restricts the medicines you're allowed to take and the doctors you're allowed to see. It's like this sacred right you had in the exam room just evaporates in the regulatory landscape. Which brings us to part two, barriers to physical choice, licensing and prescriptions. So how exactly did these barriers get built? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight. Back in 1932, the Tuskegee syphilis study began, which was a tragically horrific example of government overreach, where treatment was intentionally withheld from patients without them even knowing. And that dark history really catalyzed a massive shift in authority. By 1938, the federal government started heavily controlling which medications Americans could legally purchase, all in the name of safety. And then, jumping to 1951, Congress expanded that authority even further, mandating prescriptions for a huge range of drugs. So within just a few decades, decisions that used to be squarely in the hands of everyday consumers were suddenly locked behind federal gates. The famous economist Milton Friedman actually argued that a lot of these licensing laws act more like monopolies. He pointed out that they often raise costs and limit access, rather than strictly ensuring quality care. It's a really fascinating economic lens that totally challenges the status quo. And this debate over who holds the keys to medical information, it's not just ancient history. We're seeing it play out right now in contemporary policy discussions, like the ones involving the Trump administration and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s stated focus on healthcare transparency. It's a really complex, ongoing debate. Does pharmaceutical advertising empower patients with the info they need, or does it require stricter federal control to prevent harm? Moving on to part three, harm reduction and paternalism, the cost of prohibition. The source material essentially pits two competing public health approaches against each other here. For over a century, prohibition has been the absolute standard, just outright criminalizing substances. But the text notes this is largely backfired, driving drugs like opioids into highly dangerous, totally unregulated black markets where unknown potency makes them so much deadlier. On the flip side, you have harm reduction. This is a much more pragmatic approach. It's not about endorsing the behavior, it just seeks to minimize the risks. Instead of aiming for some utopian, totally drug-free society, harm reduction literally just aims to keep people alive. Let's bring this down to reality and look at how it plays out on the ground. Right now, in 5 states, it is entirely illegal to distribute fentanyl test strips. We're talking about simple tools that literally detect lethal contaminants. On top of that, federal laws that were originally designed to target crack houses in the 80s are currently being used to prohibit monitored overdose prevention centers, even though those exact centers have been proven to save countless lives internationally. The source even points out lawmakers who are pushing to ban certain food dyes and sweeteners, instead of addressing the root economic subsidies that make those cheap artificial additives so prevalent in the first place. It highlights a pretty bizarre reality. In an attempt to protect public health, these government bans often remove the very safety nets that are keeping people safe. All right, part 4, the cognitive liberty frontier, from flesh to thought. Okay, this is where things get really fascinating. We are officially leaving the physical flesh and blood body behind and crossing straight into the abstract neurological realm of the human psyche. Think about it for a second. We have incredibly robust legal frameworks for bodily injury, for broken bones and physical consent. But the mind, your focus, your memory, your internal processing, that is basically a massive blank spot in the law. If the law protects or restricts our right to alter our physical bodies, why is it so incredibly silent on our right to alter our own minds? Legal scholars are arguing that just like we demand informed consent before a surgeon operates on our physical body, we desperately need something called cognitive liberty. It's exactly what it sounds like, the right to mental self-determination. It would be the ultimate legal permission to dictate your own consciousness, your underlying mental processes, and your beliefs, totally free from outside interference. Essentially, it's the legal protection to use, or completely refuse, neuroenhancements however you see fit. And the sources introduce this wild concept to explain exactly why this matters so much right now: neurocapitalism. Think about it. Physical labor is largely being replaced by information processing. Our attention spans are literally the new factories. The modern economy demands constant mental optimization just to cope with the sheer volume of information overload. So taking a pill to improve your focus, that isn't just a personal quirk anymore. In a cutthroat, high-speed job market, it might actually become a mandatory competitive advantage. If your livelihood depends entirely on your brain's output, upgrading it basically becomes an economic survival tactic. Which leads us right into part 5, regulating the mind, philosophy, and the law. So how on earth does a judge regulate a synapse? Well, legal thinkers are actually looking backward to foundational philosophy to figure this out. John Stuart Mill famously recognized the mind as the ultimate private sphere. He argued that the inward domain of consciousness is the most appropriate region of human liberty. The idea is, if freedom means absolutely anything at all, it means that whatever happens inside your own head has to remain fiercely protected from state intervention. To actually make sense of this in a courtroom, the sources break mind alteration down into a 4-step spectrum. Step 1, purely mental actions, like dreaming or meditating. Step 2, bodily actions with mental effects. Think yoga or deep breathing. Step 3, using tools or substances, like reading a book or taking a cognitive-enhancing drug. Now, the main argument here is that these first 3 steps are entirely internal. Because they only affect your inner world, they demand massive legal protection. It's really only when we hit step 4, interaction with the outside world, that our actions might collide with the rights of other people. And that is finally where the state gets a legitimate reason to step in and regulate. And finally, part 6, who owns your mind? Ethics of enhancement. The ethical gray areas we are heading into are just staggering. Take these 2 scenarios directly from the text. On one hand, blunting memories. If a drug could safely block the emotional trauma of combat, does society have the right to deny it to soldiers just because we expect them to feel remorse? I mean, must they suffer for the state? On the flip side, what about enhancing memories? Could police one day legally mandate that a witness undergo transcranial magnetic stimulation, literally beaming energy into their brain, just to perfectly recall a crime? Seriously, where do we draw the line on state intervention in the brain? Underneath all this state regulation is a massive philosophical tug-of-war about authenticity. When governments try to just stay neutral, they hit a brick wall. On one side, you have the essentialists. They believe you have a static, true self that shouldn't be artificially tampered with. To them, chemical enhancement is a violation of who you really are. On the other side are the existentialists. They argue we're basically blank slates. To an existentialist, taking a smart pill to upgrade your brain is fundamentally no different than reading a book to learn a new skill. We are constantly molding our own identities. Now, legal scholars and the text argue the state really shouldn't be picking sides in this deeply personal debate, but staying neutral, it's proving incredibly difficult. So as the lines between medical paternalism and cognitive liberty continue to blur at lightning speed, I want to leave you with this one thought to chew on. If our economy increasingly demands that you perform at a superhuman mental level, but the law strictly restricts the very tools you might use to cope or upgrade those abilities, who truly owns your mind? Thanks for hanging out with us for this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and we'll see you next time.